All right, we are going to continue our lesson today about imperialism, and we're going to try to get to World War I today. So, yesterday we finished the Progressive Era, and we were beginning to talk about the presidents of the Progressive Era and their foreign policy. And we're talking about Teddy Roosevelt, and Teddy Roosevelt's style of diplomacy is often called gunboat diplomacy or big stick diplomacy, which comes from Teddy Roosevelt's saying, speak softly but carry a big stick, okay? The United States wanted to be directly in charge of and influencing the countries of North and South America. We did not want to necessarily own all these countries and plant our flag on top of them, but rather we wanted to have a lot of influence over their economy, over their politics, and to use them as places we can sell our goods, to use them as sources of resources for our economy, and to spread our own political ideals and to have advantageous positions on the global stage, okay? Roosevelt added to the Monroe Doctrine something called the Roosevelt Corollary. So the Monroe Doctrine was James Monroe, 5th President of the United States, promised that the United States would defend the independence of any country in North and South America. Teddy Roosevelt added a corollary, which is just like an addition, that said that the United States reserved the right to intervene in the actions and the affairs of countries in North and South America if those actions would endanger their sovereignty, okay? So that's kind of complicated, but basically this is what it means. We're going to be the policeman for North and South America. And if any country starts to act out of line, we're going to take care of it. For example, let's just pick a random country, the Dominican Republic, okay? There's lots of countries that we do this with, okay? You can look up countless examples, but I'm just going to pick the Dominican Republic, okay? The Dominican Republic, let's say that their government has made some errors in judgment. They borrowed too much money, they're in debt. European countries might look at this country, the Dominican Republic, that has all this debt and say, oh, we will invade the Dominican Republic and get the money that we owe. Well, the United States, under the Monroe Doctrine, would be compelled to defend the Dominican Republic to preserve their independence. So Teddy Roosevelt says, let's just cut to the chase. If the Dominican Republic starts doing something dumb, like getting into ridiculous debt and upsetting Europe, we'll go ahead and invade them first before Europe invades. We'll straighten out their finances and set them back on the path of prosperity or whatever. And that's what we do, okay? There are many times that the United States uses our military to invade tiny countries all across North and South America and fix problems that they have, whether they've gotten into too much debt and they need to restructure their finances, or whether they've got a really bad guy in charge that's doing bad stuff and attacking foreigners. Maybe they refuse to trade with us, etc. Okay, the United States is very happy to use the Marines and our military forces and the Navy and the Army, etc., to go and clean up messes. And that's what we start to do, okay? Under Teddy Roosevelt, the U.S. modernizes our Navy even further, and we build a beautiful fleet of battleships called the Great White Fleet, okay? The Great White Fleet are a fleet of modern, state-of-the-art, all-new battleships that are very, very fancy, got thick armor, they've got big engines, big guns, and what Teddy Roosevelt has the Great White Fleet do is go on a global tour. They sail around the world and stop in the major harbors of the world, really just to flex on the rest of the world. To say, look at our big, awesome, powerful Navy. Check us out. Don't mess with us. In fact, that is actually something I find the Great White Fleet very interesting. It's like one of those little hobbies of mine. But look, hey, I've got the Great White Fleet on my background. Yeah, kind of fun. This is the Great White Fleet. Okay. This is them sailing around, being like super cool battleships, like, don't mess with us. Okay, now my screen sharing is paused. It's probably because, let's see, oh, now our screen sharing. Okay, so those of you watching the video, just look up the Great White Fleet. Okay, anyways, but yeah, it's like the background on my computer. This thing is pretty cool. So he goes on this big, long, excursion around the world to just kind of show off. And the United States is really trying to emphasize our strength to the rest of the world. What Teddy Roosevelt is probably best known for, as far as imperialism goes, is the Panama Canal. Prior to Teddy Roosevelt's presidency, the best way to travel by water from New York to, say, Los Angeles or San Francisco took about 12,000 miles, all the way around the southern tip of South America. Back during the earliest days of exploration, when Columbus first sailed the ocean blue, he was looking for a water route to Asia, a fast way to sail to Asia from Europe by water that would not require sailing around Africa. And of course, as you know, he hit the Americas and he never found it. But there were lots of explorers, like the famous explorer Henry Hudson, who the Hudson River is named after, who were looking for something called the Northwest Passage, a water route to Asia that did not require sailing all the way around South America. Sadly, there is none. Okay, you can look at the map and be like, oh, there's water up here north of Canada. Well, that's ice most of the time. Okay, you can't just go, you can't go take a nice, swim across the Lancaster Sound. Okay, it's cold and icy a lot of the year. Okay, so that doesn't really work. What you need is a canal, a man-made waterway. And the narrowest point in the Isthmus of Panama is 50 miles. 50 miles is all that separates the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. If you could dig a canal, you could instantly cut down the trip from New York to San Francisco from 12,000 miles to 3. Okay? But this was difficult. Other countries had tried and failed to dig canals. In the 1880s, the French had tried to dig a canal in Panama for it was right around 10 years, and then they finally just gave up. Okay? All right? At the time, there was another famous canal in Egypt called the Suez Canal. And the Suez Canal is really important because you can sail from Europe to Asia without going around Africa. You can go through the Mediterranean Sea, cut through the Suez Canal. It's pretty fast. But the guy who built the Suez Canal was French. They brought him over to Panama to dig the Panama Canal, but he couldn't do it because the Suez Canal is out in the desert. Okay, and the desert has problems, but when it's dry and it doesn't rain as much, you can get out your earthworks movers and your dump trucks and move stuff around a little bit easier, okay? But in Panama, it's a jungle that rains about 9 months out of the year, okay? And it's not a flat land, okay? There's rivers and lakes and mountains, okay? And it's varying elevations. And when the French give up, the United States, we decide that we are going to give it a try. Whoever can build a canal first is going to have a lot of prestige. The British, they wanted to build a canal too. They had thought about going through Nicaragua, but that wasn't really going to work. But the United States eventually wants to build a canal in Panama. But the problem was that Panama used to be a part of the country of Colombia. If you look here, Colombia is this country right here at the top of South America. Panama used to be a part of Colombia, okay? And the people of Colombia had a very corrupt government. The United States offered to pay money, and we almost worked out a deal with Colombia to buy land to dig a canal. Colombia made a deal with us, but then after we had signed the papers, they go back on their deal and they decide that they don't like how much money it is, and it's a bunch of government, just frittering away at little things. And now we have the speak softly but carry a big stick, right? Teddy Roosevelt tried to ask them nicely. We tried to pay for the Colombians for the canal zone, but they don't get along with us. They don't do what we want. So now it's time for the big stick. The people of Panama actually wanted their independence from Colombia. So the United States cuts the people of Panama a deal. We basically tell them that we will give them all the weapons, all the military support they need if they will give us a canal zone. So for the people of Panama, the options are to be under the control of the corrupt Colombian government or be independent, have the United States as an ally, And all you have to do is give up a 10-mile wide strip of land across the country to dig a canal. Panama takes the deal. The U.S. sends our military down, Panama fights for its independence and wins, and we start digging the canal. That was the easy part. The hard part is actually digging the canal. It takes right around 10 years, okay? Hundreds and hundreds of workers die. I think it ended up being like thousands of workers die because of disease. It's in the jungle. People are getting malaria. People are getting like yellow fever. And eventually, we actually learn while digging the Panama Canal that mosquitoes spread diseases. Did you know that? We didn't really, disease theory, we haven't really studied this a whole lot, but people used to think that you would get diseases from just like going to places with bad air. People thought like when you went into the jungle, you would be exposed to bad air and you would get malaria, okay? Like scientists had to study it, but we had so many workers dying working on the Panama Canal, along with mudslides and rain and just general difficult circumstances, that they actually had to send down doctors like Dr. Walter Reed and Josiah Gorgas, who realized that mosquitoes were causing yellow fever and other diseases to spread. So then they started spraying like oil on puddles of water in the jungle to kill the mosquitoes, and the death rate from those diseases went down. So the Panama Canal is why we know that mosquitoes can spread diseases. Kind of fun thing right there. But anyways, Teddy Roosevelt, he has the forceful personality to push the United States through the difficulties to get the canal dug, okay? He's the earth mover. He can make the dirt fly. And even though it's difficult and other people like the French, they gave up, Americans figure out how to do it. The way a canal works when you go through a mountain is through locks. And I think I've explained this before, but the French, what they wanted to do, okay, so like Panama, you have the ocean, and then a mountain in the middle. The French wanted to dig straight through. And that was really hard because you literally had to like dig through a mountain, okay? What the United States did was we built locks. So instead of digging the whole mountain, we dug little steps. And the way a lock works is that you actually have a boat go into the lock, okay? The boat sails into the lock at sea level, okay? The lock gates close, they fill in water, the boat floats to the top. Then they go to the next lock. The lock fills up with water, they sail up top. And they go, and they do like that. They fill up, they go, they fill up, they go, they fill up, they go, and then when it's time to go down, they get drained, they go, drains, go, drains, goes. So that's how it works. It kind of goes up and down in a stairstep. This is a massive feat of human engineering. And today, the whole world benefits from the Panama Canal. If you look at this big map on the wall, you'll notice that it actually has like little purple lines that show like common distances and sea routes from place to place. And look at how all these lines, a whole bunch of them, go right through Panama. Okay, it's a nexus of trade that the whole world uses. Now, Panama, we ended up kind of bossing them around for a long time because like our canal's there. We eventually gave Panama their canal back, but for the Panama people, it was a pretty nice deal because they basically get free military protection. The United States is going to protect Panama. Nobody's going to mess around with Panama because our canal is there. Okay, so it works out pretty good for Panama. They don't have to like spend a whole lot of money on their military because the U.S. is just going to take care of it, you know, because we're not going to let that go down. Anyways, that's Teddy Roosevelt. He's all about that aggressive diplomacy to get what America wants. Okay, gunboat diplomacy, patrolling across the Caribbean Sea, making sure everybody does what we want to do. Okay, now we're going to talk about Taft and Wilson very quickly. Okay, for William Howard Taft, he continues in general the major policies of Teddy Roosevelt, but he leans more heavily on financial diplomacy, or what they call dollar diplomacy, where instead of using our military to get what we want, we use our money. Americans have a lot of money, Americans have a lot of investment, and the United States funds the development of railroads and factories and industrial centers all across North and South America. Okay, large quantities of the railroads and mines and factories in places like Mexico and in Latin America are actually owned by American businesses, okay? Which in some ways is good for these countries because they get to have railroads and they get to like grow their economy. But on the other hand, it's really good for the United States because it's like we're slurping up all those profits from their railroad companies and putting it back into the US, okay? So that's Taft's style. He focused more on the money, but he was not afraid to use the military as well. Now, Woodrow Wilson, on the other hand, he is known for what is called moral diplomacy. Woodrow Wilson, remember, he's that college professor idealist. Wait, go back. We're not there yet. Okay. He's the college professor idealist, and he wanted to spread American values throughout the rest of the world. Okay. And so Woodrow Wilson wanted to use America's political and military and financial power to influence the countries of North and South America to have democracies, okay? Where this really came into play was in Mexico. In 1910, Mexico goes through something called the Mexican Revolution. It lasts about 10 years, and in the course of those 10 years, about 1 million Mexicans die, representing about 1/10 of the population of Mexico. Okay, this is a huge event in world history, in my opinion, that a lot of times we don't talk about it. Okay, so in Mexican history, one of the biggest figures is this guy named Porfirio Diaz. Okay, and in Mexican political history, typically the two big factions, and they have different names at different times, but there's the Centralists and the Federalists. Okay, or well. So what it is, the centralists in Mexican history, there's always been a conflict in Mexican history between Mexico City in the central part of Mexico and the outskirts of Mexico, like northern Mexico and like the Yucatan Peninsula, okay? The area around Mexico City tends to support Mexico City having more and more power over the rest of Mexico. Whereas the parts in the outskirts of Mexico would rather see the individual states of Mexico have more autonomy and power over themselves. So it's kind of like a states' rights. It's similar to, like, say, you know, during the Civil War, the southern states wanted to have greater autonomy away from Washington, D.C. or whatever, okay? Kind of like that, but not the same. And so throughout Mexican history, there's been different figures that have been for or against centralizing the Mexican government and decentralizing the Mexican government, okay? All right, you're probably most familiar with the Mexican president Santa Anna, who was president during the time that the U.S. was fighting them over Texas, things like that. Santa Anna was a centralist, okay? And he wanted to take away the constitutions of the past that had given more rights to the people and more rights to the states, etc. But we're way past that, okay? In the 1860s, during the Civil War, Mexico got into some trouble with France, and France invaded Mexico and conquered it for several years. For a little while, there was this guy named Emperor Maximilian that was in charge of Mexico back in the 1860s, okay? He was a French emperor, and in Mexican history, this is remembered as a dark time in Mexican history. If you're familiar with the holiday Cinco de Mayo, that is the one battle in one of those the French interventions that the Mexicans actually won. It was the Battle of Puebla on May 5th. I forget the year, but anyways, that happened right around the 1860s, like 1861, 1862, something like that. Anyways, they win the Battle of Puebla, but then like a few days later, the French defeat the Mexican army and conquer Mexico. So it's a holiday that they celebrate to remember the one of the victories in a war that they lost. But anyways, and actually, Cinco de Mayo isn't that big of a deal in Mexico. It's a bigger deal in America among Mexican Americans. And I have a theory about that, which I'm about to tell you. But anyways, the hero of that battle is this guy named Porfirio Diaz. Porfirio Diaz is a young cavalry commander who fights against the French, and he wins. And later on, after the French are kicked out, he moves into politics. And Porfirio Diaz becomes president of Mexico. And then the next election comes up, and nobody wants to run against him. He's so popular. And then the next election comes up and nobody runs against him because he's so popular. And he's like, keeps running for president and no one runs against him for like 20, 30 years. And it's totally legitimate and totally, there's no one that, it's not that people are afraid to run against him. They are. He's basically a dictator, but he's the president. Okay, it's like you have a president that keeps running for president over and over again, and no one ever runs against him. He's a dictator. Porfirio Diaz is a centralist, and Porfirio Diaz was very friendly to the Western world and investment from the rest of the world, like the United States and Britain. Under Porfirio Diaz's rule as the president of Mexico / dictator, for about 20, 30 years, Mexico developed industrially, but most of the industrial developments, like the mines and the railroads, etc., were owned by foreign investors like Britain and America, okay? But in 1910, Porfirio Diaz is getting old, and a lot of people expect him to retire, but he refuses to retire. There's been a lot of resentment building up for years and years and years. And this guy named Francisco Mondero decides to run for president against Porfirio Diaz. He actually runs against him, and it's serious. And this kicks off a revolution because obviously Porfirio Diaz ain't going down without a fight. Okay, and so Francisco Mondero kind of starts a little revolution, and a lot of people that are upset at Porfirio Diaz join the revolution. But the thing is, it's not just a nice and tidy revolution. It's not like Francisco Mondero becomes president and everything's better. He does become president. Porfirio Diaz runs away to America, along with a lot of his fans, which is part of why I think Cinco de Mayo is popular in America, because that was like his holiday, and a lot of them ran off to America. Anyways, moving on. So, Francisco Mondero takes over. I'm telling a bunch of names. But this new guy becomes president of Mexico. But he's only president for like a year. And for the next 10 years, there's revolution and revolution, counter-revolution. All these people that had been so upset for like 20 years under this dictator, there's all these different groups that are upset, but they don't really agree on everything, okay? The people in northern Mexico, they don't like Porfirio Diaz, and the people in southern Mexico don't like Porfirio Diaz, but it's not like they don't like each other either, okay? So they all agreed that Diaz was bad, but they didn't necessarily like each other. So once they get rid of Diaz, they start fighting amongst themselves over who's going to be in charge, okay? And so this is all happening, and it lasts for about 10 years. And Mexico goes through like 7 presidents, okay? And most of them die, okay? Francisco Mondero, he's president for about a year, and then his general, Victoriano Huerta, betrays him. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, his general like walks in and is like, "You're arrested. I'm the president now. I've got the army behind me." And so Mondero gets like thrown in prison. And then they move him in the middle of the night from one prison to another. But in the middle of the night, as they're traveling, they like stop the car and they tell Francisco Mondero to get out. And he's like, "Wait, what's going on?" "All right, start walking." Like, "What's going on, guys?" They shoot him in the back of the head. Okay, dead. Okay. And Huerta, he's a bad guy. He's really bad. And that guy is enemies with President Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson is watching this, okay? Americans are watching what's going on in Mexico, and we are upset because there are thousands and thousands of Mexicans dying in these massive battles. Okay?
Interruption. If we have any high school students who are going to take spring pictures, you may go to the chapter at this time. Just spring pictures at this time.
All right.
Thank you.
Goodbye, picture people. Have a good time. Okay. We'll post the video later. So, anyways. So, the Mexican Revolution has like full-scale battles with like, literally, there's like mine workers that like stuff TNT into train cars and they like roll them into towns and blow them up. They call them La Máquina Locas. It's like a lot of exciting stuff. But anyways, so the people that fight in the Mexican Revolution, they fight for all sorts of different reasons, and they get into a lot of disagreements with one another over, oh wow, okay. Well, y'all can catch the video. I'll post it later, okay? So, close the door behind you, Mr. Nathan. All right, so anyways, it's pretty exciting to me. I had a whole class on the Mexican Revolution in college in my master's degree. It's pretty interesting. But anyways, so, and this is my chance and excuse to have a rant about Mexican history.
It's only if they're buying pictures, yes?
It's only if they're buying pictures, yeah. Or if they miss the first picture and they're like retaking it, yeah. All right, so what happens is that it's like it's like Game of Thrones in Mexico, okay? And we don't have time to talk about all of them. I spent a whole semester studying the Mexican Revolution. And basically one guy takes out another guy, takes out another guy, takes out another guy, okay? Until finally, like, there's only one person left that's really in charge. Woodrow Wilson is paying attention to this, and what he wants is for Mexico to have a democracy like the United States. So Woodrow Wilson tries to like pick different revolutionary leaders and support them to get rid of people that he doesn't like. Woodrow Wilson hates Victoriano Huerta. Okay, Huerta is like, he's like one of the worst like enemies in Mexican history. He's like their Hitler. Okay, he's a dictator. He takes over, and he's actually really good buddies with the Germans. The Germans give Victoriano Huerta weapons and machinery, and you actually see like full-scale trench warfare in some of the battles of the Mexican Revolution. Meanwhile, the Americans support these guys. One of them's name is Venustiano Carranza. The other guy's name is Emiliano Zapata. And the one that you're probably the most familiar with is Pancho Villa, okay? Pancho Villa was a Mexican revolutionary in northern Mexico. He's the guy in the middle of that picture at the top. And Pancho Villa got a lot of support from the United States. The guy to the right is General John Pershing, okay, who later was the leader of the U.S. Army in World War I. And the United States gave a lot of money and weapons to Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa was a very charismatic leader. He was known for like his big cavalry charges, and he's the guy that really gets famous for La Máquina Loca, throwing a bunch of dynamite in the train and like rolling it into town and blowing it up. And Pancho Villa, he leads a lot of daring raids against Huerta, and Villa, Carranza, and Zapata team up and they get rid of Huerta. And then they immediately start fighting each other. Okay, it's like they team up for just a few minutes and then, okay, now let's fight. Who's in charge? Pancho Villa was a hero in America. People loved reading about him in the newspaper. There was even a movie company, a Hollywood movie, that went to Mexico, followed Pancho Villa around, and recorded him like in battle. And they made a movie starring Pancho Villa as himself. And it played in the United States. And they lost the movie. That movie has been lost to history. But a few years ago, Antonio Banderas made a movie about Pancho Villa and the movie about Pancho Villa. And it's pretty like accurate to the movie apparently. But anyway, it's pretty interesting. But Pancho Villa, fun fact, he never drank because he never wanted to be drunk in front of other people. You think like, oh, he's this big revolutionary, wild guy, like he drinks a lot. Actually, Pancho Villa never drank, but he did love ice cream. He had a sweet tooth. Anyways, Pancho Villa is America's hero for a while until he starts to lose. Pancho Villa gets like betrayed, and anyways, he starts to go on our bad side. But while we're still liking Pancho Villa, America actually invades Mexico in 1914 in the city of Veracruz. Veracruz is on the coast, and there's some American sailors that are in the city of Veracruz that get like, I think they get beat up or arrested or something by Mexico, and the United States like demands that Mexico apologizes, and when Mexico refuses, Woodrow Wilson, we basically invade and capture the city of Veracruz for like a month or so, and that's American soldiers hoisting the flag above the city of Veracruz. And Woodrow Wilson is contemplating, should we just go in and invade Mexico and sort this out? Like, this revolution is a mess. Thousands of people are dying. Maybe the USA just needs to go in, send our army into Mexico City, and straighten this mess out. We decide not to, primarily because of World War I. World War I was kicking off in 1914, and the USA didn't want to commit all our soldiers to Mexico if we were going to have to, say, fight Germany, okay? So we leave after a little while, but the United States supports the people fighting against Huerta. Eventually, Huerta is defeated, and this new guy Carranza gets in charge for a while. Then he gets defeated by this guy named Obregon. Then Obregon gets defeated by this guy named Calles. Then Calles fights against Catholics, and there's like a whole religious side to the revolution in the Cristero War. It gets really messy, and we don't have time to talk about it all. But if you're interested, I've got some books that you can read. Okay. Anyways, Pancho Villa, though, he like becomes like the loser. Okay, and he is being hunted down. And so what Pancho Villa does to escape capture is the Mexican authorities are like chasing him. He like jumps into the United States. And he jumps back and forth and back and forth and back and forth across the border. And in Columbus, New Mexico, he raids an American city. He raids an American city and he actually kills American civilians in Columbus, New Mexico. And this upsets the United States greatly. Pancho Villa becomes a wanted criminal, and the U.S. Army invades Mexico to hunt for Pancho Villa. The Pancho Villa expedition sees this guy hunt for this guy. They used to be friends, but now they're hunting for each other. It's one of the first times that the U.S. Army like uses airplanes when we're like hunting for Pancho Villa. Of course, we can't find him. He escapes. Okay. Eventually, I'll tell you the final end of Pancho Villa's story, just for fun, okay? So Pancho Villa, eventually he surrenders. He surrenders to the Mexican authorities. He says, I promise I will be good. Pancho Villa is so popular with the Mexican people that the Mexican government knows that they can't just execute him because then they have Revolution Part 10, okay? So they let Pancho Villa go free as long as he promises not to be a revolutionary anymore. So Pancho Villa lives for a little while in relative peace, okay? He just becomes like an ordinary guy. But there's always that chance that he might decide to dust off his revolutionary cap and get out his rifle and go fight again. So the Mexican government plans an assassination. Pancho Villa, one day, he's returning from a quinceañera. He's riding in a car with some of his buddies. They come back from quinceañera and they round a corner, and out from the bushes pops out a bunch of assassins, and they just spray his car full of bullets. They just completely wipe out the whole car. Pancho Villa, they leave his body right where it is, but they steal his head. And so if you go to Mexico City, you can go to like some of the revolutionary cemeteries, and there's like this big, like, you know, there's this big monument to Pancho Villa where his body is buried, but not his head. No one knows where his head is. His head is probably like somewhere in Russia. There's some like super rich, evil guy that's got like Pancho Villa's head in a jar. And it's like, look, I got Pancho Villa's head. But I mean, nobody knows where his head is. Okay.
Like Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, kind of like Bonnie and Clyde, where they just like pop out from the bushes, just spray the car. That's what happens to Pancho Villa. And, you know, kind of a sad end to his life, but he was a big, you know, he's a big deal at the time. Anyways, let's talk about why didn't we invade Mexico full force? Because we invaded Mexico twice when Wilson was president, but we just kind of barely stuck our foot in. You know, we kind of looked for Pancho Villa, then left. Okay. Why didn't we commit our full army? Well, that's because we were concerned about this thing called World War I. World War I is also known as the Great War. It is the largest conflict in history up until that point. The only one that's bigger is World War II, okay? But this is one of the largest military conflicts in world history by just about every metric, okay? By the number of combatants, the number of countries involved, the size and scale of the battles is enormous, okay? World War I is a war fought in Europe between the major powers of the day, and we are going to talk about that and why it happened, okay? So we've been talking a lot about American history. We've neglected European history, but this is American history class, okay? So I'm gonna tell you like a brief history of European history, okay? Europeans, they're always fighting, okay? There's a very diverse group of people living in Europe, but they're always connected by the Romans, okay? The Romans, back in ancient times, you know, they conquered almost all of it, and they left their mark on much of the world. And throughout human history, different people have tried to restore the Roman Empire. there was the Holy Roman Empire, which was based in Germany back in, the Middle Ages, which was a collection of like hundreds of different little tiny countries and fiefdoms and principalities and things that all like tried to be the Roman Empire again. The Spanish, they might have seen themselves as like the new Roman Empire. The Byzantines and the Ottomans saw themselves as a Roman Empire. Even the Russians have like their own like bizarre little claim to say like they're the Romans, okay? Because like for a long time, the Russian emperor was called the Tsar, Tsar, which is like Russian for Caesar, okay? And different groups have tried to like restore the Roman Empire, etc. But there's like leftover battlegrounds. And for much of European history, the big rivals were Great Britain, France, and Spain. Great Britain, France, and Spain were always duking it out over one thing or another. But towards the 1800s, things start to change with this guy named Napoleon. Okay, you probably heard of Napoleon. Napoleon was a French emperor. He tried to conquer all of Europe and he almost succeeded. But after Napoleon's conquest, he kind of redrew the borders of Europe. Okay, and during the late 1800s, those countries that had been left in his wake, like the reinvigorated Germany, they had started flexing their muscles in imperialism. Okay, they had been conquering Africa and Asia, and they've been fighting each other. And you start to see some buildup of rivalries in Europe that will eventually blow up in 1914. Okay? Back in the 1880s, 1890s, France and Germany fought a series of wars back and forth with each other. And in the last major war between France and Germany, Germany had won. And that had stuck a bee up France's bonnet. Okay? And France started to become friends with Britain, not because they were friendly. They had rivalries themselves and almost gone to war. In fact, France and Britain have gone back and forth to war probably hundreds of times if you add them all up together over their history. But in the early 1900s, France and Britain started to grow close together because of the growing power of Germany. Germany had, for most of its history, been divided between hundreds of little tiny kingdoms. But now in 1900, they're one unified country and they're pretty stout, okay? So when you talk about the 4 classic causes of World War I, you can think about this acronym, MAIN. This is what I teach my regular history kids. I've kind of given you a little bit more background. But MAIN, the 4 main causes of World War I are represented by the word MAIN. M stands for militarism. Militarism is the buildup of military forces in Europe prior to World War I. All of these countries had gone through their own little industrial revolutions like the United States had. And with the Industrial Revolution, you'd have better technology, better factories, and the same factories that can make cars, the same factories that can make toasters, can also make tanks and can make guns and can make cannons and bombs. And in the early 20th century, there is an arms race between the different countries of Europe to see who has the biggest and most powerful military. Militarism became fashionable. Political leaders in Europe would often dress in military uniforms, and that was just like fashionable. It was just fashionable to dress in military uniforms. That was what was cool, was to be in the military. And here's the thing about militarism. If you have a lot of weapons, you might scare people from trying to attack you because they're scared that you're going to use your weapons on them. But the opposite effect can happen, which is if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail. If your government is spending lots and lots of money on a military, you're kind of going to be more inclined to want to use it, right? We got all these guns, we got all these bombs. They're just sitting here. They look cool, but what are we going to do with them? Okay. And so all the major countries of Europe were building up larger and larger militaries during the early years of the 1900s. The A in Maine is the alliance system. Alliance systems are mutual defense treaties between different countries. Okay. If you attack me, you're going to also be attacking my friend. Okay. So, Forming an alliance is a way to deter people from attacking you. If you, the little country of Serbia, right here, are afraid that some mean country like Austria-Hungary is going to attack you, you might want to be friends with a big country like Russia. That way, other countries will be scared to attack you because they don't want to have to go to war with Russia, okay? If you're Austria-Hungary, it might be a good idea to be friends with Germany. That way nobody wants to attack you, because if they attack you, they have to fight Germany as well. And so there was a network of alliances, and many of them were secret alliances that existed in...
Teacher, what's interruption? I need senior girls who need to either have their senior pictures retaken or missed on the day that we took them the first time. So just senior girls at this time. Thank you.
So a lot of these alliances are secret and other countries don't know about them, but these intricate alliance networks made it possible for one little war between two countries to expand into a war between all the major powers of Europe, okay? The major alliances that existed before World War I was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy formed something called the Central Powers. Of course, when World War I started, Italy switched sides and joined the Allies. Serbia and Russia had an alliance, and Russia and France had an alliance. Britain was neutral, but they had guaranteed Belgium. Belgium is a country right here on the border between Germany and France, and Britain had promised that Belgium would be neutral in any conflict between Germany and France. And Britain had promised that they would intervene if anyone messed with Belgium. So when the war does kick off, it starts out between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, and it very quickly spreads throughout the rest of Europe, okay? Russia gets involved, Germany gets involved, France gets involved, and then when Germany goes through Belgium to get to France, Britain gets involved. And then the Ottoman Empire and Italy and a bunch of other countries join as well, okay? It's a lot. The I in Maine stands for imperialism. These countries in Europe had been competing with one another over imperial possessions in Africa and in Asia and across the world, and that had contributed to rivalries and resentments between these countries. They were mad at each other, they didn't like each other because they had conflict with one another, okay, over things like Africa. And so if Britain and France and Germany are fighting over who owns Africa and they get in a fight in Africa, that could spill back into Europe. That's also why World War I is called World War I, because when France and Germany and Britain are fighting, they're not just fighting in Europe. They're fighting in Africa and in Asia and across the world. So why it's a world war. The N stands for nationalism. Nationalism is pride in one's country, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But in the early years of the 1900s, nationalism was at extreme highs, okay? Children were taught in school to be proud of your country, which is a good thing, but also to hate those other countries, which is kind of a bad thing. And people were taught to look down upon other nations and to put the interest of your nation ahead of all other nations, even if it meant hurting those other nations. Okay, British kids were growing up in school and were taught to call Germans Krauts, okay, right? Call them the Huns, to call them the Mongols, to call them nasty names and think of them as bad people, okay? The Germans, they looked at the British and the French as, you know, as bad people as well, you know, the French frog, like there's all sorts of bad things they would call them, okay? We're not gonna get into that. But they were taught from an early age to like hate other countries and love their own countries, to the extreme that like our country could take you down in a fight, so let's duke it out, okay? So the four main causes of World War I: militarism, alliance system, imperialism, and nationalism. That's what you guys need to know. And welcome back. How was your pictures? Doing well? Okay.
We're wind-blown.
All right, so class is about to end. We'll hopefully finish up World War I over the next couple of days. We're going to pause the meeting for now. We're going to end it for now. All right, so we'll pick this up tomorrow.